Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Talk. You've got coffee. I apparently left mine on my desk, but that's okay. There's more to life than an addictive substance that will ultimately rot my brain. Just kidding. If you know me, you know I love a good cup of coffee. And, oh man, let me tell you, months on the road, there was some days where it did not come early enough. But when there's just something nice about driving and sipping on a coffee.
Yeah.
And so wherever you're at this morning or afternoon, it's fall. It's great coffee season.
It feels like cold weather and coffee, warm coffee,
absolutely.
Really go together.
We thought about going outside to where there's real colorful trees, and we thought, no, let's go with the fake painted wall. Jeff's away this week. He's enjoying some fall time off, as I was last week. It was a nice week just to be in the Okanagan and get some things done around the house. Yeah. And I believe Jeff is doing much of the same.
I think he's doing pretty much the same.
Yeah. He's I actually think this was maybe the first time I've had a whole week off and never left the valley. I think that's maybe a first. I'd have to go back to the last records of everything, but that might be a first for me.
And hopefully that was a good thing.
It was nice,
because I do feel like there's not a lot that we don't have that is needed. Like everything I feel like is so close to us. There's not a lot of reasons to leave this area.
Well,
but that's me. I'm a homebody when it comes
I can think about 36 or so reasons, and they're all related in some way. And that's typically why if we're going to go leave the valley, we're going to head to visit. 9 times out of 10, we're going to visit family. Yeah. And we've had a lot of that this fall and thought, you know what, let's change it up. And just, we had some friends come and visit us, and that was really, really good. So hopefully you had a great Thanksgiving weekend, and we're moving forward. NHL is full swing this week. I know that for 4 of you, that's really important. And so whatever the distraction of the season is, we're enjoying fall, and trust you are too. Looking back though at the sermon last week, Thanksgiving. Yeah. We had a joyful noise and a whole morning of joyful celebration. And Jeff challenged us in a few ways in regards to joy, lots of notes for the morning. But if we just recap, maybe he's been really trying to kind of work us through what are 3 things each time. And that feels like a challenge to me personally, not only to review them, but also go, oh, I'm preaching the next one. Okay, what are the 3 things I'm going to give you guys next week? But just as a quick reminder, okay, so he had 3 things. Review the bigger story. Yeah. Right?
I would also even say review, but also retell. Yeah. Right? Because I think that's also a community thing as well too. And that's why I love actually some of those songs that we sing on a Sunday morning that says, God created us, this happened, Jesus died, he rose again, hooray, let's go to heaven, right? Not that every song needs that, but sometimes it's actually a really good reminder. Review, retell. Yes. Speak it to one another.
Well, and that's what the Israelites would do, right? In the early days when they were traveling through the wilderness. I remember there was that challenge, right? We're going to set up this rock monument here so that when you pass this spot with your children,
and they say, tell them the story. What is that?
Yeah.
What is that?
Hey, Dad.
I love that concept.
Right. What's this pile of rocks? Oh, this is because God was faithful, and we tell the story. And
it's like setting up your own punchline for your joke, right? Yeah. You just... Oh, what's that? Well, let me tell you.
And the best jokes are the slow burners, right? You come back to 40 years later and you're like, hey guys. So yes, we review, but part of that is just retelling the bigger story of what God's doing. I'm going to skip over the second one to go to the rework your rhythms. I mean, are there things in our life we just need to change up? I heard a comedian this morning talking about going to bed early as the best drug. He's like, there's this new thing, it's going to bed early, and he's talking about how great it is. You go from 10 o'clock and then, hey, maybe try 9:30. And it actually is one of those things that sometimes we're just like, hey, maybe I'm in that habit of being up too late.
My watch actually gave me a congratulations.
Yes.
For going to bed early last night.
Good for you.
Because it said I was on a good sleep streak.
Nice.
Even though I don't feel rested, but it's good.
Going to bed early doesn't necessarily mean that you sleep well, but it can lead to that? And it was the opposite, right? I stay up all night and then don't sleep. Oh,
Yeah.
no, good. So, what are the rhythms? What are the patterns that need to just be kind of shaken up a little bit? And sometimes those become revealed when we do the second thing, which he talked about as being what? Regulating the intake. And I think did he give more than one example? I just, one example he gave just sort of stuck with me so much, but I don't even want to necessarily repeat it, because I think what he was ultimately trying to lead us towards is just what is the thing that's causing problems.
Well, because he started out talking about what we take in,
yes,
and the food that we take in, and the way that it actually in some ways actually becomes some of our cells, and it comes right down to a molecular level where the things that we take in actually become some of us, right?
Yes.
And then we got sidetracked on,
Right. So, right. Because in some ways, that old adage, you are what you eat, has...
Which is so apropos for Thanksgiving.
Right?
I am pumpkin pie.
I feel like a turkey.
Meatloaf.
I'm a mashed potato. And very stuffed. And so that's, absolutely, right? I think of when I was a kid, I should say kid, I was middle school age in a Christian school, we had this song that we would sing in chapel, input, output, and it was did you ever hear this?
No, I never heard this.
Oh my goodness, I'm not going to repeat it here. But it was all about what goes in is what comes out.
I could see how middle schoolers would just giggle at that too, because I had kids of my own giggling this Sunday.
It was the dawn of a digital age, and we were all like, computers? I just got a computer. Oh, now we're singing a song about computers?
Yeah.
The 80s were wild.
Yeah.
And so, but there's so much, something in that important to remember. As a side caveat, my son came home from school last week, and they started watching. They're getting an education in neurochemistry, which is a huge topic for grade 7s. They're all like, yes, let's learn about neurons. And I know no other words to share in terms of talking about the brain. But he comes and he's like, every time he sees Sheena, I pick up her phone. Now he's like, no more dopamine. And he tries to knock it out of our hand. And because that's what they've been trying to, what they've been learning about. And if he's going to learn anything, I think that's a really good thing. What Jeff was wanting us to focus on is what are the things that steal our joy, and what are the ways that we can increase joy.
Yeah.
And if we can, this is sort of, I guess, in our family, in parallel to the sermon, led us to kind of think through what are some of those things, though, that like dopamine is one of those brain chemicals, and some of you are way smarter than me, and you're going to be like, oh, he's half right. But that ultimately lead to a pseudo or fake joy. And I think that sometimes we forget that. I think that's really what Jeff was trying to help us think through. Or what are those things? So he did mention news intake as one of them, and certain foods. But
even in the same way that sugar can be considered food.
Yes.
Right? It's the same kind of thing of okay, well, this is sort of, it could give you happiness, but not necessarily real joy. Right? Yeah. So
one of the things I was led to watch, sort of suggested, was a video online, serotonin versus dopamine and 7 key differences between, the speaker talks about happiness, but I think what he's really talking, it's also joy. Sometimes we think, well, joy and happiness are not the same. Well, in this case, I think that's because he was opposing it to something that's pleasurable. And just a couple really stood out to me that I'd offer with you, church, because I think it relates back to the sermon last week. Mm-hmm. And that is that pleasure are those short-term things that just feel real good in the moment. Mm-hmm. And joy is something that is long-lasting. Mm-hmm. And even we talked in the sermon, and especially that video from Bible Project, right? It's talking about how Paul, in moments of suffering, still held on to joy. Yeah. And how is that possible? Because his joy didn't consist of just a lot of short-term feel-good things. Yeah. And some of those, then just a couple others that came out, that stood out to me from this, that have got me thinking about the sermon more, is that pleasures are things that can be easily taken. Right? So if I have a car and that's where my joy is, well, that can disappear. But when my joy is rooted in healthy things, they can't be taken away. Even if our joy is in, sometimes, family can be one of those that straddles the line, right? Because if a family member passes away, we're like, they're gone, but often they're not in the same way. And I think that's when we start to see a difference. But pleasure, he noted, is something that is achieved alone, right? I can go do something that's just for me and it feels good and it's great. I play a little game on my phone. It's just me and the phone, or a video game or whatever. But happiness comes in larger social settings.
Right.
And for me, that also, a little plug for small groups or life groups, however you think of them in your head, for life groups, because that's where we do life together and we build more moments of joy and it feels good and it can be pleasurable, but ultimately it's something deeper. Last one, just to think about, is that the things that just bring us pleasure often come in things that can be really addictive, he pointed out, whereas the things that will bring joy, you can never get too much of them.
Right.
And I think that's when we think about, life with other people, life together. We need, you might need, I'm more introverted. I need time alone to recharge, but at the same time, always with people. You might feel tired, but that's not the same thing, but you're still joy. That is there, and it's such a beautiful thing. And so when we think about if you've been thinking through this week, okay, what needs to be cut out? That's where I would start. What are the things that just sort of are those little pleasurable things that don't last? And maybe that comes from, like he said, the news, or that might come from certain foods or certain whatever, or always get the flyers each week or on tablet or phone or whatever, right? And I'm looking for that sale, whatever those things are. That's, I think, what we need to think through. Are they bringing joy, or are they just bringing short-term pleasure? Yeah. And
I would say experience as well too.
Absolutely.
Like roller coaster or something like that, right? Like yes, you can kind of experience that as a group, but really that's still just right here, right?
Yeah, absolutely, totally. And Thanksgiving is a great season to reflect on that, because when we have the meal around the table with the family, it can be all about the food, and I would say that's just going to lead to sort of pleasure, which leads to dopamine, which leads to brain cell breakdown and all of that. You can, some of you know that better than me. But the time together with people, even if we don't always agree, we don't see eye to eye, that's where we build more joy.
Yeah.
And a longer term thing. And so it really can also be where's the focus in this? Yeah. But anyways, those are some of my reflections. I don't know, whatever you want to add in on that. That sort of felt like a lot of regurgitation, but that I think is good for us to be challenged and wrestled with every now and then.
In light of what you said too, I can see how the second relates to the third. How the second thing, which is regulate your intake, actually relates very much to the third, which is review your rhythms, or rethink your rhythms, right? Like thinking about, okay, what am I constantly going to, or what am I always finding myself, or when I'm bored. Right? It's exactly what you're saying. Why are you taking that in? Okay, that's a rhythm that you have in your life.
Yeah.
I have my own rhythms, and some of them are good and some of them are not healthy, right? So I need to review that and say, okay, does some of these need to change? And what can it be better replaced with, right? Like, really our hope for all of Sunday was just to kind of say, the joy of the Lord is our strength. Looking at, and for those of you that maybe weren't there on Sunday, to actually say, we're welcoming this brand new baby, this beautiful child that just kind of entered our church family a week or two ago, and it was his first time in church. But at the same time, we also are saddened and disheartened at the loss of Bill Warner, our friend from years and years in this church, right? Like the long-term sense of joy that comes along with all of that, that's really a gift that comes from God. Because if it wasn't for that sustainability that we find in Christ, those kinds of experiences would send us for this huge high, like holding this little baby and smelling him, like, I would say huge amounts of dopamine, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you have that sense of crash. And that doesn't mean that we just put on this happy face all the time and say, these things aren't good or aren't meant to be experienced, but actually to say, God, you're good and still faithful in all of these things. And I put my trust in you in life, in birth, in difficulties, in Thanksgiving, in mealtime, in everything, in death as well too. And that's what I believe too, that I was pulling this out to see the final line of that Bible Project video, which Jeff kind of referenced as well too. Christian joy is a profound decision of faith and hope in the power of Jesus' own life and love. It's something so much larger. And yet, decision, which Jeff and I talked about last week, and yet it's also something that God does within us. So it's decision, but it's also like there's also that as well too. But you can look at last week's coffee talk to talk about that a little bit more. But yeah,
very good. Looking ahead, not a lot coming up in the next couple weeks. There's some things on the horizon, but one thing that sort of came across our attention, our awareness, is that some of you, now I won't say many of you, receive our weekly bulletin, but are having trouble finding it. And so I don't even know if we're still calling it a bulletin. I say bulletin, but that's old habits. Maybe that's something I need to rethink. Anyways, I digress. Our weekly email that comes out, and we all have this. I got an email this week from an organization, and they're like, "Hey, you still with us?" And I went, "Huh? Come again?" And it happens every now and then. If we don't open emails very regularly, they just sort of, our email filters them out. Sometimes email things, even though you've been looking at it regularly, suddenly all of a sudden your email thinks it's junk because it's part of a chain thing. So we just want to just a helpful reminder, if you're looking for our weekly email because you want to be informed and you want to know what's happening at church, 90% of you are right with us. But every now and then, just check the junk mail. If you're like, hey, I haven't seen that weekly email in a little bit, have a good little review there. That's something we were asked to pass along with all of you.
And sometimes it actually gives some helpful and good information from between Friday when it comes out, usually Friday morning-ish, somewhere around there.
Yep.
Between there and Sunday morning, there's sometimes some things that happen. Like if there is a Friday night event or a Saturday night event, it will still give that sense of information too. So don't think that it's just a Sunday morning just to check it before you come to church. Sometimes it's actually, there's stuff that's, right on the spot for Fridays too.
Mm-hmm. And other than that, I think, half of the church is on baby watch. It seems that way anyways these days. And what a joyful thing is just to walk alongside families as they experience that. So if you've recently had a baby or you're any moment now about to, we're praying for you, and please be praying for all of our growing families, as that's just such a pleasurable thing we get to join together in on. Anything else we need to bring up before we go? Then we'll just say happy autumn and fall, or whatever you call it, and we'll see you again real soon.